we've been driving at about 9,000 miles with the top detectors from Escort. Hey, what's going on, guys? I decided to break the review of the MAXcam 360c dash cam and radar detector into two parts because it ran a little long when I was discussing both aspects of this detector. So we're going to focus on this review on just the radar characteristics, how it performs as a radar detector, and we're going to have a follow-up review on the dash cam portion of that detector. So let's get to it. Okay, we've been driving a few weeks now cross country as well as parts of Canada on an extended trip on a lot of radar detector testing and laser jammer testing. You've probably seen some of our videos, hopefully you have, some of our real world encounters that we've recorded. And we've been driving with a variety of detectors: Unit R8, Valentine V1 Gen 2, Escort MAX 360c Mark II, Escort Redline 360c, and then the Escort MAXcam 360c. And I wanted to do a summary review here based on our pretty extensive driving experience now with this detector. So as you all know, this is Escort's top price detector. It retails typically for $849, and it includes, it's their first high-end dash cam integrated radar detector. Cobra, which is a Cedar brand as well, had the Road Scout, still offers it. Very interesting, novel design, appearance, what have you, but it's based on the radar platform was based on a Cobra detection platform, and this was done around the time the companies Escort and Cobra merged, and that was a product that was carried over. This, on the other hand, is Escort's platform, radar detection platform, truly, and then their dash cam. So I want to talk about the radar detector performance and characteristics first. And I'm just going to say, my opinion of all the three that I've driven with here that I mentioned, the MAX 360c Mark II, the Redline 360c, and the MAXcam 360c. My preference from a radar detector performance and behavioral aspect is of the MAXcam 360c. And, you know, every radar detector has a personality, is how I like to think of them. So if you think of a radar detector just in sensitivity, you're looking at a very little one-dimensional review of a radar detector and how it behaves. And I've said this before, you don't really want to base your decision on a radar detector strictly on how sensitive it is. It's just not enough information. There's other characteristics like reactivity. We talked about how quick it is to respond to a detection of radar before it alerts, and so on. So insofar as the characteristics that I like about the MAXcam 360, I'm going to go back to one of my favorite detectors from Escort. And this was back in the early 2000s, so I'm going back 20 years or so it's been a long time. And that was when Escort had introduced the 8500 X50. Beltronics had the RX65, but Escort had the 8500 X50. And they were originally built on the Beltronics S7 platform, later became M4, what they call it, that's their internal. But what I liked about the 8500 X50 is its overall behavior. It's, you know, in its day, its sensitivity was right up there with the best. Its performance and detection and ramp up, all of this reactivity was all very good. Its laser sensitivity was very good. We occasionally got some rare detections for laser, which is very difficult on a radar detector. to do effectively. And its filtering in its day was just terrific. So overall, it's one of the best radar detectors that I've ever driven with Escort in its time. But there is a personality, and after a while you get to know the behavior of a radar detector, how it responds, how to interpret alerts, whether they're legitimate or false, and you get to know a radar detector. So it's like a personal relationship. And at the end of the day, you ultimately have to come to a level of comfort with that radar detector that you know and you can rely, and it's dependable. And not just in its operation, but consistency. That's another thing, consistency. So going back to the MAXcam 360c, this detector feels like an 8500X50 in many respects. And so that's what really basically endears me to this radar detector more than the other two from Escort. Insofar as sensitivity, it's right up there with the very best of V1 Gen 2, the R8, even the Escort Redline 360c. At least on K-band, it's extremely, and I'm talking about the Redline on KA band on the Redline, it's very, very close, often within 300 milliseconds. Now, it looks like off-axis detection relative to the Redline 360c doesn't seem to be quite as high, but whether that translates into a better chance of getting an advanced warning to a radar source ahead of you or approaching you, you know, maybe not so much. But more importantly, I think, than sensitivity, because we're all at a level now with the current radar detectors that I almost think sensitivity is a non-issue. They're all extremely high, and we have Unit to thank for that. They really raised the bar and forced every other manufacturer to step up to their game and catch up. And for the most part, I think, insofar as at least sensitivity, they have. So I don't really think when you're talking about these top detectors that is even an issue that should be a driving decision. But other characteristics. And the important thing here with the MAXcam 360 is it seems to be very responsive to radar, not just on KA, but on K. And I've emphasized this before in other reviews or videos or discussions of radar detectors. Having a fast reacting K detector is absolutely essential. People who discount the value of K, either because they drive in an area where they don't see it, they're limited in their driving range, therefore they focus primarily on KA. Again, it's distorting the actual overall assessment of a radar detector, because you got to look at the overall characteristics, a broad range, not only a KA, K, X band as well. So I find the detector does extremely well on I/O and being able to give good alerts, very good alerts. Another characteristic of the MAXcam 360 that I really like is its steady ramp up. Okay, so you get a weak detection as you make an approach, or somebody's coming up behind you, running I/O behind you, traffic coming against you. It alerts with a weak signal, as it should, and it lets it go quickly enough, and then it'll re-alert when it picks it up again, and that conveys the texture of instant on, and that's absolutely essential. Now, comparing the alerting and ramp-up performance, let's say, to a Redline 360c, which I'm just going to be brutally honest, is my least favorite of the three detectors that we're talking about here. In comparison, the Redline 360c, particularly on K-band, sometimes can be 6 seconds or more before it alerts, and I know it's seeing the source even though it's choosing not to alert, because as we approach the source and it's not alerting, after that 6 seconds or whatever the delay is, then I get an alert that's full strength, like somebody just turned on their radar gun instant on right in front of you. And that's extremely disheartening and very uncomfortable and uneasy feeling. And so I drive with some anxiety with the Redline 360c. Not my favorite detector, quite honestly. But the MAXcam 360c is, to me, a much more well-rounded, balanced, performing detector that you can get comfortable with and know the characteristics. So that's the radar side of things. Very impressed with that. Insofar as alerting to other radar other than police radar, which is photo, speed, you got multi-radar, you got GATSO, those types of sources. When enabled, the escorts as a whole generally false more to multi-radar than, let's say, a unit in R8, which is very good at not alerting to multi-radar, let's say, from a collision avoidance system, a K-band system in a car that's misinterpreting, or multiple cars that you're around that it can misinterpret. So you're going to have to live with a higher degree of falsing, unfortunately, if you're driving in an area where multi-radar is, and that's until they do a better job at identifying the true signatures of multi-radar as Uniden does versus the false signatures of, let's say, collision avoidance systems of cars, K-band. You're just going to have to live with that. But multi-radar works on the MAXcam 360c. I'm satisfied with that. Insofar as GATSO, if you saw our previous test against GATSO in Iowa with the top detectors, no alert to that. So mesh diffusion, it's on the Redline 360c, not on the MAXcam 360c as it stands with firmware version 1.9. So let's go to the laser aspect. Now, you'll read, and there are self-proclaimed experts out there that will say laser is useless on a radar detector. Couldn't be further from the truth. Laser is often targeted. In fact, when we travel across the country, we routinely get targeted from a police laser at 2,000 feet to 2,400 feet. Now, that's when I argue, or my position is, laser is the most lethal. It's not when you're close, like laser jammer tests would suggest. It's when it's farther away, not when you're close. And the reason is simply because you can't see the officer when you're driving. You just can't see him. It's a half a mile away. You can't spot an officer a half a mile away. And when they're shooting at those distances, you've got a beam divergence that could be upwards of 20 feet. It's a narrow beam, but the further away you are, the wider the beam goes. And it can take a little longer for the officer to actually target you. Now, the LTI SXB, they have a telephoto lens, which makes it easier to see a vehicle from great distance, but the other LiDARs do not. So you got to be careful to put that reticule right on a car, and doing that at a great distance, particularly when there's bright sunlight out, and that reticule will be maybe a little bit washed out and maybe a little bit harder to see. That all favors the driver, right? So you want a detector that's sensitive. And if you just going to countermeasures, if you saw our last video encounter in Minnesota, completely unexpected, we had a TPX jammer, which we routinely turned off very quickly so not to jam the gun. But we also have Vail G6 on the car. Black Mercedes, no front plate, not much chrome. The lights are pretty good size. All those things work to our advantage because when you cover it with Vail, there's not much of a return that laser can get, particularly from greater distances. And if you see that video carefully, unedited is what it was as it happens. Real world, you can't deny real world. We were getting lasered all the way down to basically going under the overpass, which is where that officer was targeting from. So you figure we cut the jammer off in about 4 seconds, 5 seconds thereabouts when we detected it. And then for another 12, we got alerted that they were trying to get our speed. And how do we know that? It's because the laser detector went off and continued to go off. So I find the MAXcam 360c, in my experience, has a great laser sensor, which is quite surprising and very wonderful and welcome to see. And it again reminds me back of the 8500X50, because it also had a very good laser sensor. Second to, I think, Valentine at the time, the V1, and it was very good. So again, another great characteristic of the detector. The rear sensor is actually quite impressive. We're getting detections of laser from the rear, and I'm going to give you an example of when that happened. But if you look at the laser sensor for the rear facing, it's on the top of the detector. And you know, the detector, unlike the 360c Mark II or the Redline, that are angled, they're flat, and then they're like trapezoidal, angled on the sides. On those two detectors, the little laser sensor, smaller, is on the side and is often obscured by the length of the radar detector. So not only is the sensor or the LED cover in front of it smaller, it's actually in a position that almost makes the point of having it in the back a moot point, because it doesn't have a real line of sight. Unlike the MAXcam 360c, which not only has the laser sensor position on the top right part of the detector way up high, it's also curved. If you think of like the Starship Enterprise with the bridge that curves, it's about 180-degree curvature as opposed to just a flat little thing. And clearly that is showing the refractive capabilities are superior with this sensor, and we're getting laser alerts from the rear. And again, the only other detector from Escort that I really saw that could do that was the 8500X50. So kudos to Escort to actually make a good laser sensor, because I think it's absolutely essential to have one on a radar detector. I do not discount the ability. And even if one were to argue, well, there's no value, once you're shot, you're done, which is not true. It just isn't in the real world, period. End of story, full stop. Even if it were true, you should always be aware that you were targeted, even if it's too late. Just like an IO shot that you weren't prepared for, you know you get hit, period. Do you want to be completely oblivious to being surveilled or your speed measured? Of course not. So again, if you're going to have it here as a capability, it should work well. And again, with the MAXcam 360c, it does well. One other thing about the MAXcam 360c in terms of laser, which I think is important, and even if it's somewhat of an academic point at this point, we happen to come across a Polyscan mobile type unit, which is, they were in housing and they can be moved around in Maryland. And back in late of 2022, I believe Maryland contracted with Victronic for 90 of these systems thereabouts throughout the state, the cities and what have you. And we actually came across on a secondary road, no matter, coming into a town that I fully didn't expect, and the detector went off and I thought it was a false of some sort, but upon reviewing the video, it was legitimate. And so one day, a week later, we came back with all of the detectors that I've already mentioned that we're driving with, and I ran against that Polyscan FM1 system and the MAXcam 360c, if I remember, and I'll have to post those results. I have a video coming with that. I think performed the most consistently and the best. It wasn't 100%, but it was pretty high up there, and it was the only one that I recall that was able to actually alert to a Polyscan FM1 from the rear. And that's really impressive, because the Polyscan, unlike a police LiDAR, which is a stationary beam that's targeted, it's a scanning beam because it's getting multiple lanes. So not only are you getting the pulse rate from the lasers, but you're actually getting movement from the laser itself as it scans multiple lanes. And the fact that the MAXcam 360c could alert it at any time really impressed me. And actually, was the harbinger for me to see actually how well the laser performed when we had that real encounter in Minnesota. So again, endears me to the MAXcam 360c. Other characteristics of the radar detector when it comes to alerting that I'm not a fan of, and it's easily fixable by Escort, and they've, for whatever reason, chosen to implement this with all of their dual arrow going back to the MAX 360, the original, is if it detects laser or multi-radar in this case, there's no directional information. So, the arrows on the lights would show you the direction, all blink. So even though you got a detector that can give you directional information, for whatever reason, they're not. And that's situational awareness information that you should know, frankly. You should know where the multi-radar source is, photo or speed. Is it ahead of you? Is it behind you? Where is it? You have no idea. Same with laser. Is it coming from behind? Is it coming from front? No way to know. Absolutely no reason for them not to put directional information. Uniden does it very well. I just don't get why Escort chooses not to do that. That's a choice they're making, which I couldn't disagree more with. Other characteristics of the MAXcam 360c that I would like to see improved would be the transitions in the arrows. I think there's still room. It's a lot better than when the units first came out, the MAX 360, but it has room for improvement. The Valentine, I think, still is the gold standard for that, and the Uniden R8 does pretty darn well too. But the Escorts just tend to be sluggish, quite delayed sometimes for whatever reason. Another characteristic that I think can be fixed in firmware is the mute capability. On a relatively frequent basis, if I'm driving and I pick up a source of 1 or 2 bogey front and rear, with the spec display or tech display, I press the mute, and instead of giving you the option to mute, it goes right to lock out the signal. Shouldn't be that way. You should press it once,
6.1 miles.
You mute, you press it a second time, it asks to lock out that location, you press it, and then you lock it out. In many cases, you can't do that. It just goes to lock out this location, and if you don't, it continues to alert. Very annoying. And if you're stuck and you're moving around in slow traffic, you're at a light, you're sitting with this, it's very annoying. I actually have to store it, lock it out, unlock it, and then mute it. Okay, so it needs to be addressed in firmware, and I'm sure it's an easy fix. So that's something else that could be improved, right? Things I like about the detector also is, while the display doesn't seem any larger, it seems more readable in the daylight than the other 2 detectors, the 360c Mark II or the Redline. For whatever reason, it just seems to not get washed out. The detector's not longer. It's about 25% wider than, let's say, a MAX 360c Mark II, to make room for the dash cam portion. Not really longer, but for whatever reason, it just seems to be much more readable in bright sunlight. Right now it's like 1:30. The sun's right up here. It's coming into the dash very, very strong, and yet I'm able to read the display very nicely. Not quite as bright as the Uniden R8 or R4, which are really bright OLED displays, but still better than any of the other detectors I've driven with for whatever reason. Color and saturation. Color seemed to be a little washed out relative to, let's say, the MAX 360c Mark II. Don't know why that is the case. The reds are a little washed out, for example, when you compare them back to back. Don't know why. At whatever brightness setting, but usable in any event. In all of the colors, the amber, the green, the red, the blue, I actually find the blue is the easiest to read during the day, for whatever reason. But there you have it. What else? I do like the dial. There are buttons on the top, of course, that, as we expect on the Escort radar detectors, but really the thing I like on the MAXcam 360c is when you bring up the programming on the detector, you can rotate the dial to skip through the menu options much more quickly than the plus and minus of the other detectors, or the other buttons that you would do to change or step through the menu. So I really like that. I like the dial when you're in regular operating mode, that you can turn and quickly change the volume. Also very nice. The mute button, very, very accessible in the front and the center of that dial. Very easy to push, which I like. Another thing I found that was odd, and I'm actually going to potentially return this and get another one, is for some reason, and this is independent of the volume setting, so I don't understand why this is, but often when it alerts the K-band, it sounds very distorted. It's not a clean K-band tone that it normally the other detectors have, or any of the other Escorts ever had, but it's like distorted. And it's not when the volume, I can turn the volume almost all the way down and it still sounds distorted. And then other times it'll alert the K-band and it sounds totally fine. So odd characteristic and inconsistency on the alerting tones. I'm not quite sure why that is the case. In terms of mounting the Escort MAXcam 360c, I'm going to give you some recommendations. One, and this is true with all of the sticky cup magnetic mounts from Escort, be very mindful of mounting these things very high. These are heavy detectors, or if you have the M2 dash cam in addition to the weight of another detector, it's a lot of weight. And I have found their sticky cups can lose adhesion to the windshield for any number of reasons. If it gets too hot, the sun is blaring down, I've had the sticky cups lose adhesion. If it gets cold overnight, I come out the following morning and it's gotten colder and less pliable as a result on a cold windshield. I've had it drop. And if it's slightly dirty or the windshield's got some film on it, that can also cause it to drop, and that's a lot of weight. And a lot of these cars today have display screens, let's say in the front, for your entertainment and backup cameras and things of that nature, command modules, all that kind of stuff, multimedia. And some of them have frames like they're not integrated, built into the dash, right? Or if you drive a nice car like a Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Porsche that has real wooden accents, and if this detector breaks loose, and it does, and that falls, it can crack your wood, it can crack your screen, it can crack the housing. It's not a good thing. So I tend to prefer mounting somewhat lower on the dash, closer in to the front of the windshield, lower just by the nature of the rake of the windshield. So when the detector falls, and eventually it will fall, it doesn't have that much to fall, and it's not going to really damage anything because it's going to land right on the dash. But in terms of the dash cam, you have to be careful mounting low, because when I am finding in certain lighting conditions, when the sun is blaring down on you, that you can get a reflection of the dash back to the windshield, and you can just see that when you're driving. But if your detector is there and the camera sensor's there and the lens and what have you, and it's right in the area where there could be a reflection, it could definitely have an impact on your on the quality of your video. So you got to be mindful of where to position it, whether it's in the center of the car, a little bit more to the left or to the right. Figure out in the best lighting conditions, varied lighting conditions, the best place to mount it where you minimize those types of reflection and artifacts, things like that. Also make sure the window is very clean. Another thing I found that was odd, and I'm actually going to potentially return this and get another one, is for some reason, and this is independent of the volume setting, so I don't understand why this is, but often when it alerts the K-band, it sounds very distorted. It's not a clean K-band tone that it normally, the other detectors have, or any of the other Escorts ever had, but it's like distorted. And it's not when the volume, I mean, I can turn the volume almost all the way down and it still sounds distorted. And then other times it'll alert the K-band and it sounds totally fine. So odd characteristic and inconsistency on the alerting tones. I'm not quite sure why that is the case. In terms of pricing, when the Detector is selling at $849, it's Escort's most expensive detector. But when you figure the Redline 360c is $799 normally, and the M2, you know how much that is. That's over $100, $150. You put them together in the MAXcam 360, it's actually only a $50 increment. So think of it, if you like, the idea of a Redline and its sensitivity, if that's your primary driver, for example, you get basically that performance, and for an extra $50, you get a complete dash cam. And I like that. Sure, I've run with independent dash cams. You have to hardwire them, you have to put them in your, tie off your mirror, whatever. It's a little bit of a pain. Now, if you only have one car and you're driving it, fine, you may be happy with that. Us, we have about 6 vehicles, right? And we use them quite for different things. And so we're moving from car to car. I don't want to have 6 dash cams installed in all cars, just not practical. I do like the idea of it being integrated with a very, I'm thinking of this product for a radar detector. But to have that dash cam capability and you plug it in and it just goes is a wonderful thing. And I can just disconnect it, take it into another car, treat it as a radar detector, and the dash cam comes with me. And you get all those benefits of having a dash cam. So anyway, another great characteristic of the MAXcam 360, and I actually think it's a great value for what you're getting, really. If you look at the price and you strip out what would be a good decent dash cam, you're now at a $699 range, right? Which puts you into a Unit R8. And so, reasonable, I think, and these products do go on sale. Escort loves to do sales, unfortunately, for resellers, but for them and for consumers, it's a good thing, right? And they go on sale enough, and you can even get this detector sometimes on a sale, and then that even makes it a better value at that time. So that's my feeling on the pricing of the MAXcam 360c. Overall, I think it's my favorite Escort detector that's currently being produced. I would take this any day of the week over the Redline 360c. Any day of the week. I just trust in it more. It's just much more consistent. The sensitivity ultimately is just slightly behind, and it's, I don't even think, really significant. And the sensitivity, any slight deficit is going to be made up, more than made up, by the reactivity, especially on K-band. This thing will out-alert a Redline 360c on K-band by 6 seconds or more. And why? Because the Redline 360c is not alerting to a long detection of K-band for whatever reason. It may make the detector seem more quiet or better filtering. Not true. It's just not alerting. It may see it. It's like, I'm not going to alert to it, so I'm quiet. Driver who doesn't know it's there is going to think it's quiet. It's great filtering, but the fact of the matter is it's not filtering. It's just not responding, right? So it's harder on the MAXcam to be responsive, as it is, like, and I've said it with the Unit and R8. It may false a little bit more, but on K, but you get it for real performance when you're coming with I/O and things like that. One other thing I'll just notice or talk about just briefly as I noticed, these detectors, Escorts, tend to sometimes false on KA in areas that you would expect genuine police radar. I've seen that a couple times. Certain vehicles, I think I have videos. When I pass a certain vehicle, I may see like a 34.7 thereabouts or a 35.5, which is unusual because I wouldn't expect to see a harmonic of a K-band collision avoidance or FMCW source potentially throw that, but for whatever reason. But overall, very tolerable. And again, if I had to go on a long drive, my choice would be the Escort MAXcam 360c. I think it's a great detector, and I have no qualms driving with this as I would almost say like as a daily driver. Overall, a terrific detector, and I recommend it. I just implore Escort to get some of these things fixed, firmware tweaks, commit to it, and make this product fully realized, and we'll be one of its biggest fans. So hopefully this wasn't so much of a short summary review. We're going to do other reviews, even though I did a little bit of rudimentary comparison of this detector, some of the other Escorts or Uniden or Valentine. We'll do other reviews on the other detectors since we've driven with them as well. But for now, that's about it. I hope you found the information informative, helpful in helping you make a decision on what you want to do, what do you want to buy if you're in the mood or in the market, to get one. We would appreciate you visiting Radar Busters and showing your support for all the work we do. We greatly appreciate that for honest assessments of products. We don't want to mislead you. We want you to be happy with your product, and of course the technical support is going to be second to none from any other source. Please visit us on Facebook. If you do Facebook, we got a page there. We'd love to have you involved with it. Follow us. We put some content up there that we don't have on YouTube or anywhere else, so you can get social with us there. Please subscribe if you like this video. Give us a thumbs up, ring that little bell kind of thing, and we'll have more videos coming your way. But until then, wish you well. Take care again. Drive safe, drive smart. Most importantly, drive protected.